July of 2012, I handed my 13-month-old baby girl over to a doctor and asked him to surgically remove the entire left side of her brain. Jocelyn was born with a condition called hemimegalencephaly. Her brain didn't develop properly in the womb. Usually when you look at a picture of the brain, it looks sort of like a walnut. It has two halves, and both sides are pretty much the same size and shape. Jocelyn's dad and I aren't medical professionals, but even we could tell when we looked at that first MRI image of our daughter's brain that something was very wrong. The right side was much smaller, and the left side was too large, and it was weirdly shaped. We started referring to that side of the brain as the big bad brain. Because it was so large, it had too many neurons, and it was generating a lot of unnecessary electrical activity. Jocelyn started to have seizures. She had her first seizure when she was 2 months old, and within a matter of weeks, she was having several seizures per week. Her doctor diagnosed her with epilepsy, and we tried putting her on a variety of different anti-seizure drugs, but none of them worked. Before long, she was having multiple seizures per day. So what is a seizure exactly? If you think of your brain as a computer, a seizure is a kind of glitch that causes your brain to stop running its current programs. At the end of a seizure, the brain has to kind of reboot itself. So if a child, like my daughter, is seizing many times per day, their brain never has a chance to develop properly and learn new things. By the time Jocelyn was a year old, she was already showing signs of being significantly cognitively delayed as a result of all of the seizure activity. She wasn't crawling. She could only sit up for a few seconds at a time, and she certainly wasn't walking or talking. Her doctors warned us that if we couldn't find a way to stop the seizures, she might never walk or talk. She might end up unable to feed herself or care for herself. She might not even recognize us as her mom and dad. There was even a chance that she wouldn't live into adulthood. Her doctors recommended surgery, specifically a surgery called hemispherectomy, which is the disconnection and removal of one half of a person's brain. Crazy. How could taking out half of our daughter's brain possibly make her life any better? The doctors explained to us their reasoning. They said that since all of the seizures were coming from the left side of the brain, if they took out all that malformed tissue, the seizures should stop. And hopefully with time, the healthy right side of the brain could take over some of the functions and responsibilities of the missing left half. They called their decision to recommend hemispherectomy to us a slam dunk. I joked later with my husband that they probably called it a slam dunk because if they called it a no-brainer, that might have seemed a little insensitive. It might have been a slam dunk for them, but it certainly wasn't for us. Hemispherectomy is known to be the most invasive surgery in existence today. We had so many concerns. First of all, there was no guarantee that the surgery was definitely going to stop the seizures. And at minimum, after the surgery, Jocelyn would be left with right-sided weakness, maybe permanently, all along her body. She would probably always walk with a limp. She'd have very limited function in her right hand, and she'd be left partially blind. So the cure seemed nearly as daunting as the disease. But the fact remained that despite everyone's best efforts, Jocelyn was still seizing. And when I say seizing, I want you to understand what that looked like. I'm going to play a very brief video of just one of her seizures. And remember, she was having many of these every day. I know, that was difficult to watch. It's hard for me to watch 5 years later. We were sick at the thought of taking out half of our child's brain, but we couldn't sit by and just watch her suffer. So we made the difficult decision to go forward with the hemispherectomy. We scheduled the surgery, and we had to wait a few weeks. So during that time, we, of course, told our family and friends about our decision. The newspaper ran a story about it, and I started a blog called Jocelyn's Journey. It wasn't long after the story got out that we started hearing from a lot of people in the public who had very strong opinions that our daughter, our disabled daughter, should not be operated on. One woman warned us that if we allowed the doctors to do this, our daughter would end up a vegetable. Another man commented on the newspaper article that it would have been better if we had left her on the rocks to die, like they did in ancient times. Several people commented that they thought it was horrible that we would allow the doctors to do something so barbaric and medieval to our own child. But you know, none of them had to hold my daughter while she seized. None of them would be feeding her or changing her diaper in 30 years if she lived that long. And none of them had to see the pleading in her eyes for someone to take her pain away every time she suffered another horrible, body-racking seizure. Jocelyn underwent a grueling 13-hour hemispherectomy surgery on July 7th, 2012. The surgery was not a success. She was still seizing, even after the hemispherectomy. We were, of course, devastated, but I can't say that we were entirely surprised. Performing surgery on a typical adult brain is incredibly difficult. It's brain surgery. But imagine trying to operate on a tiny baby's brain when the brain is malformed and the parts aren't located in the right place, or some of them are missing altogether. Navigation for the surgeon is a nightmare, and trying to find and sever all of the tiny connections between the two hemispheres is a huge challenge. It took 3 additional surgeries, but finally, in February of 2013, Jocelyn was free of the big bad brain. So here's a fun fact you can throw out at your next cocktail party. A lot of people ask me, what fills the space where the brain used to be? And actually, in early experiments with hemispherectomy, doctors did think that that space had to be filled with something. And they experimented with a variety of different fillers, including ping pong balls. Eventually, they discovered that the cavity would simply fill with cerebrospinal fluid, which is the same fluid that cushions and surrounds your brain normally. So this is an image of what Jocelyn's brain looks like now. No ping pong balls. So what is life like for a person with only half of their brain? Jocelyn is seizure-free. She is medication-free. She is walking and talking. She's going to school. And she's learning to read. And she has all of the sassy personality that you can pack into a 6-year-old body. Her neurosurgeon calls her one of his top learning experiences, and he travels all around the globe sharing her story, along with a picture of him with her, and she's wearing a t-shirt that says, "I train neurosurgeons." Like him, I try to share her story whenever I have the opportunity for several reasons. Number one, I believe that surgery is a highly underutilized tool in the treatment of epilepsy. Right now, in the U.S., about 500,000 children have active epilepsy. About 70% of those are going to find good seizure control with medication, but 30% are going to continue to seize, despite taking powerful cocktails of heavily sedating anti-seizure drugs. For many of those children, brain surgery, as scary as that sounds, offers the best chance for seizure freedom and near normal development. Unfortunately, only about 5% are referred for surgical evaluation by their pediatrician or neurologist. The referral rate is lowest for African American children and for those with public insurance instead of private insurance. Secondly, I hear from parents all the time who have just received the same sort of devastating diagnosis that we did 5 years ago. And a surprising number of them have never been given the opportunity to speak with anyone about the possibility of surgical intervention. I'll give you a particularly heartbreaking example of this. There was a woman who reached out to me on Jocelyn's blog. Her child had been diagnosed with hemimegalencephaly in the womb. Her doctor told her that there was no hope, that nothing could be done, that her child would simply seize uncontrollably until he died. And then, 6 months later, she found Jocelyn's blog. She discovered that there was hope, but it was too late. Since then, I have made it my mission to ensure that every doctor, every medical professional, and every parent knows that there is hope for children with intractable epilepsy. And lastly, I want to address the critics, the trolls, those who looked at my daughter, saw only her diagnosis, and asked, why even bother intervening? Or who questioned us, how could you do something so horrible to your own daughter? A parent will go to any lengths to save the life of their child. You don't need to understand that decision. You just need to be grateful that you're not the one having to make it. Compassion is always the right choice, and that is a no-brainer. Thank you.